Okay, so we are reading A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. We're on chapter 13, Mortal Flame. It got very hot inside our dubious shelter, but the protection didn't need to last long. The cleansing wall rolled past us in less than a minute and went on its merry, devouring way along the corridor. I dismissed my own wall. It was a bit resistant about being unconjured without getting to actually consume anything, but I managed to shove it away. And we were left there, alone, in the newly scorched corridor with the faint charred mushroom smell of burnt maleficaria coming out of every vent. I kept standing resolutely upright and staring after the wall of flame that had passed, as if I thought any moment now it might come back. It wasn't going to. The end-of-year cleansing is quick and thorough. The walls of mortal flame start in pairs and sweep away from each other towards the next one down the corridor. All of them are placed and timed so they don't leave any places to hide. The same time the wall had been going past us, the two walls in the stairwell had met on the landing. They'd both winked out, and the wall that had swept over us probably finished a little further down the corridor. However, I was much more inclined to watch for a wall of mortal flame coming back up than I was to look down at Orion, since I'd have to see his expression and might have to actually say words to him at that point. I bet that was like the first time she's gotten a kiss, because she's been in here and been a pariah for like the last 3 years or 4 years.
Yeah, it was always middle school.
But she said she didn't have very many friends there either, so...
Yeah, well, yours wasn't a friend either, was it?
Well, that's a... Then I nearly went over as the whole place began to heave and surge beneath my feet. The walls and floor outside the ring where my protective wall had been were still scorching hot, so I had to crouch inside the tiny space with him, both of us clinging to each other with one arm, holding the other out like a clumsy two-headed surfer, trying desperately not to topple over and sear ourselves on the heated walls. At least I couldn't have heard anything he tried to say to me. The gears were going, 100 times louder than when I'd been safely tucked inside my room for graduation, and the stairway outside began to really move, squeaking horribly. The familiar landing of our own res hall ground slowly into view, then continued on to vanish below. It was all the way out of sight before the stairs locked into place again with a heavy clanging thump, and the grinding noise stopped. A moment later, all the sprayers turned on at once, and the corridor was instantly filled with clouds of steam. We were left sopping wet in a humid cloud of fog, so thick we could barely see or breathe for a moment. But the walls were already baking off the moisture, and the hollow roar of the drain vacuums began to suck up the excess, leaving just the drowned rat pair of us gaping in the middle of a sparkling clean corridor. The end-of-term bell clanged away, and faintly echoing in the stairwell, I heard doors clanging open in the dormitories, above and below. Beneath our feet, a more muffled grinding was still going on. That was the senior dorm level, winding the rest of its way down to the bottom. If the cleaning machinery had run, down there Clarita and Wen and the others would come out into a nearly empty graduation hall, scorched from end to end by an even bigger wall of mortal flame. Some of the smaller mouths could have hidden under the larger ones, or under debris. Some of the siren spiders could probably have made it, thanks to their shells. Patience and fortitude would have survived, too. It would have taken a solid week of a direct bath in mortal flame to wear those away. But their thinner tendrils would have all burnt up, and all the eyes on their surface. The seniors would be able to go straight for the gates. All of them. Or maybe it hadn't worked after all, and the seniors would instead be dumped into a starving horde that had been stirred up like a nest of wasps and was waiting for them with open jaws. We wouldn't know, one way or another. Not until next year. My goodness, having that hanging over your head for a year.
It's better than what they used to have.
Or worse, if the mouths are mad. We'd made it to our senior year. The 1 in 2 odds we'd beaten so far. Only our chances had been modified by Orion, changing the house rules under us. And when he took hold of my shoulders, I didn't shove him off again. "You saved my life," he said, sounding baffled by it. I gritted my teeth and turned to look back at him, ready to inform him that he wasn't the only one who could be useful on occasion, except he was staring at me with an absolutely unmistakable expression, one I'd seen fairly often in my life. Men occasionally aim it at my mum. Not the kind of expression you're thinking of. Men don't lust after mum in a leering kind of way. It was more like looking at a goddess, accompanied by thinking that maybe you might get the goddess to smile at you if you, I don't know, prove yourself sufficiently worthy. I just never once imagined anyone pointing anything remotely like it at me.
You've seen that look.
Not really. I hope not.
You've seen that look.
I've seen you look at me like you love me, not that you worship at my feet. That would be weird. I had absolutely no idea what to do with it, other than possibly knee Orion again even harder and flee. That was really appealing the more I thought about it, but I didn't get the chance. Instead, he shoved me to the floor, straight into a half-frozen, half-scalding puddle, and fired off half a dozen targeted blasts over my head to destroy a small pack of gorgers who'd evidently survived in the ceiling inside a pocket of safety that I'd created and were now jumping down to have us for a celebratory feast. Oh, they were in her circle, but on the ceiling. I get it.
All the way to the ceiling.
Yeah.
I kind of envisioned it as a dome.
Yeah, more like a bubble.
I think it's easy to make a curtain.
Which was exactly the moment when a dozen people came off the landing, just in time to see me on the floor at Orion's feet. Him standing heroically over me, his hands full of glowing smoke, and the scorched and smoking corpses of the gorgers in a neat circle around us, just as the last one came thumping down. Chapter break. Reader, I ran the fuck away. It wasn't difficult. Everyone wanted to talk to Orion to hear how he'd done it, how he'd slaughtered the mouths and fixed the machinery and saved the seniors. I was fairly sure that by the end of the day, no one would remember that there'd actually been a team involved at all, much less that I'd been on it. If I'd wanted to stay with him, I'd have probably had to wind both arms around his waist and cling like a really determined ivy. But the crowd moved me away without any effort on my part at all. All I had to do was make sure I was getting pushed off in the right direction. To do what any sensible person does at the end of term, I went straight for the workshop. Where I had 2 shining minutes all to myself before anyone else got there. The supply containers are all purged completely and refilled from scratch at the end of term, so I didn't even have to worry about mouths. There were 5 forging aprons hanging by the big furnace, made of some heavy flame-resistant fabric. I grabbed the one that looked closest to Adja's size, spread it out on the workbench, and started loading it up. I went for book chest materials first, because if you have a particular project firmly in mind, and you sacrifice an opportunity, like being first into the shop after a resupply, you're more likely to find what you need. Straight away, I scored another 4 pieces of purple heart, 2 bars of silver for the inlay, a set of heavy steel hinges, and a coil of titanium wire that I was pretty sure I could use to make spelled wire that would hold the lid in place whenever I wanted to leave it. I found a little section of an LED light strip also. Spellbooks are mad for electronics. If you make a book chest that lights up when you open it, you're almost guaranteed to never lose a book, unless you're really careless. Other people started to turn up just as I finished piling that up on the apron, but then I had another good couple of minutes to grab miscellaneous things before I had to start worrying about protecting my haul, since all of the new arrivals went straight for the materials that are really valuable for trade, like titanium rods and bags of diamond chips. I decided not to compete. Instead, I thought about what Adja might need for her loot, and I found a bag of fine metallic wire, a packet of sandpaper, and 2 enormous bottles of clear resin. I bundled it all up and carried it out with me just as the crowd really started to arrive. I went the other way down the corridor from the shop to the opposite landing all the way on the other side of the school. I didn't want to have to fight my way through the adoring crowd that was probably still clogging up the one where Orion was. And anyway, since our floor had rotated, it was entirely possible the other landing would now be closer to my own room, and all sorts of other perfectly adequate excuses. The stairs are crowded at end of term, with everyone running all over the school madly for supplies, but going down to the senior dorm room wasn't as bad. There wasn't anyone below us anymore. Our res hall itself was positively civilized. Anyone still there had missed Best Shop for supplies, so mostly it was just enclavers who didn't need to go to the effort. They were enjoying hot and relatively carefree showers or just hanging out in the freshly cleansed corridor chatting in groups. Some of them actually nodded to me as I went by, and one girl from Dublin said, "You got a forging apron. Lucky girl. Would you swap for it?" "It's for Adja, ninth room down the hall from the yellow lamp," I said. "I'm sure she'll be glad to hire it out." "Oh, that's right. I saw you written up. Best of luck," she said with a congratulatory nod. Exactly as though I were a fellow human being or something. I got my haul back to my room, which I entered pretty warily since I hadn't been there to barricade the door against mouths trying to flee the mortal flame in the corridor. Mana was still flowing handily through the power share on my wrist, and I didn't have the least compunction to use it to cast a revelatory light spell. I went over every last corner of my room with it, including under the bed, which I pushed onto its side. Just as well, I spotted a mysterious cocoon tucked very carefully inside one of the big rusty springs, waiting to become an unpleasant surprise. I tipped out the jar of nails and screws on my desk and put the cocoon inside. Maybe Aja would be able to do something with it, or I could sell it to some alchemy track student. I found a few more handfuls of vermin class Maleficaria on the shelves among my textbooks, and while I was dealing with them, one small scuttler jumped off my desk where it had been hiding behind the papers. It had no ambition for a meal at the moment. It just ran straight for the drain in the middle of the floor. I tried to zap it, but it was too fast, and I missed. It dived between two bars of the grating, energetically wriggling its rear with the gleaming stinger, and squeezed through before I could think of anything else to throw that wouldn't have melted down a large section of the floor, or possibly killed anyone walking past in the hall. Oh well, that's how the whole place would get thoroughly infested again by the end of the first quarter. There's just not much to be done about it. I'd just tiredly tipped my bed back over with a big clang when someone knocked on the door. I killed the revelatory light instantly. My impulse was to pretend I was somewhere else. On the moon, maybe, but the light had surely been visible on the other side of the door through the cracks, and anyway, I'd literally just made an enormous thumping noise. I steeled myself and went to the door, and cracked it open with several possible remarks going through my head, none of which turned out to be relevant, since it was just Chloe. "Hey," she said, "I saw the light. I heard you and Orion made it out. I figured I should see how you were doing. Are you okay?" I'd say I'm as well as could be expected, but I don't think anybody had any right to expect me to come out alive, so I suppose I'm actually better, I said. I took a deep breath and made the effort to let go of the freely flowing mana and unclasped the power sharer band and held it out to her. She hesitated and said tentatively, "You know, if you change your mind about the spot..." "Thanks," I said shortly, without pulling it back, and after a moment she reached out and took it. I thought that would be it, and I'd have liked it to be. Chloe had clearly just taken a shower and had her damp, dark blonde hair back from her face into thin silver clips. It was in a neat bob that someone had surely cut for her lately, and she was wearing a blue sundress with a twirly skirt and a pair of strappy sandals. The kind of outfit not even an enclaver would risk wearing after the first month of term. It didn't have a single stain, and it wasn't even much above the knee. She couldn't have worn it until this past year. It would have been hanging off her. Meanwhile, I was still in the more threadbare of my two shirts, which hadn't been improved by my recent adventures. My dirty, patched combat pants with the thick belt holding them up, and the two strips I'd sewn onto the bottom to make them longer, and the ragged 6-year-old Velcro sandals I'd had to trade for midway through sophomore year, when I definitely outgrew the pair I came in with. I'd gone for a too big pair at the time, but now they were on the last inches. My hair was mostly hanging out of the ragged plait I'd done it in before going down into the hall. Not to mention I hadn't showered in the last 4 days, unless you count getting drenched to the skin in the corridor purge. Ew, so they're kissing and they don't even, brush their teeth or anything. Ugh. Ugh.
Can you imagine?
No, and I don't care about dressing up. I wouldn't even if I could. But the contrast made me feel even more like I'd recently been dragged backwards through an entire hedge maze. But Chloe didn't say a polite goodbye. She just stood there in my doorway, turning the power sharer over in her hands. I was about to excuse myself to go fall into my bed for 12 hours or so, and she blurted, "Elle, I'm sorry." I didn't say anything because I wasn't clear what she was apologizing for. After a moment, she said, "You just, you get used to things and you don't think about whether they're good or even okay." She swallowed. "You don't want to think about it, and nobody else seems to either. And there's nothing you can see to do about it." She looked at me, her whole soft face and clear eyes unhappy. I shrugged a little. "There's not meant to be anything you can do about it." She was quiet, and then she said, "I don't know anything I can do about it, but I don't have to make it worse, and She was a collection of fidgets suddenly, looking away and licking her lips, uncomfortable. "I lied in the library. We weren't really worried you were a maleficeer. We wanted to be worried about that because we didn't like you. We'd all been talking about how you were so awful and rude and how you were trying to use Orion to make everyone suck up to you. Except it's the total opposite. That day Orion introduced us, I acted like all I needed to have you be my friend was to let you know that I was willing to let you talk to me, like I'm so special. But I'm not. I'm just lucky. Orion's special," she added, with a huff that was trying to be a laugh and didn't quite manage it. "And he wants to be your friend because you don't care. You don't care that he's special, and you don't care that I'm lucky. You aren't going to be nice to me just because I'm from New York." "Well, I'm not nice to anyone, really," I said, grudgingly, feeling a squirmy inside being on the other end of her speech. It was too much of a real apology. "You're nice to people who are nice to you," she said. "You're nice to people who aren't fake, and I don't want to be fake, so I'm sorry." Please.
Oh, sorry.
"And I'd like to hang out sometime, if you wanted." "Yes, just what I wanted was to make a friend of a rich enclave girl, so I could routinely rub my face around in all the luxuries I couldn't have, all of which were, in fact, quite nice, even if they didn't measure up to the things I'd chosen in their place. And if Chloe Rasmussen turned out to be an actual decent person and a real friend, that would mean the things I didn't have weren't necessarily incompatible with the things I really cared about. And how exactly I was meant to put that together without being discontented all the time, I didn't see. Only I was reasonably certain that saying no and on your way now would in fact make me rude and stuck up after all, just in a chaotic and contrary way. "Yeah, all right," I said, even more grudgingly, and the only good thing that came of it was that then, finally, after she smiled at me a little shyly, she said I looked tired and she'd go and let me rest. And then she did go, so I could shut the door and flop myself down on my bed and sleep like the dead. I somehow miraculously wasn't. There was another knock on my door some time later, and I heard Lou say, "Elle, are you awake?" I'd been asleep, but the alert on my door had woken me, and I got up for her and Adja. They'd brought me down some lunch from the cafeteria. I gave Adja the forge apron and the supplies I'd found for the loot. They'd both got decent supply hauls, if not as amazing as the one I'd managed, and Lou had picked up some good notebooks and spare pens for me while she'd been picking up some for herself. "Do you want to tell us about it?" Lou asked, after I'd finished wolfing down the food and sprawled back out on my bed. "The machinery was broken in some kind of different exciting way that took them longer than an hour to fix," I said, staring at the ceiling. "We lost one of the artificers on the way in, and Piers keeled over doing the shield, and we got back late and got caught on the shop floor during the cleaning, and Orion kissed me, which I hadn't actually meant to say, but it came out, and Lou gave a squeak of excitement and covered her mouth."
Oh my God.
"But how did you get clear of the cleaning fires? Adja said, deadpan, and Lou shoved her in the knee and said, stop that. Was it nice? Is he a good kisser? And then blushed bright red and burst into giggles and covered her face. I probably would have been the same color if I could have managed it. I don't remember. Oh, come on, Adja said. I don't. I groaned and sat up and put my face against my knees and finished in a mutter, I kneed him and shoved him off me so I could cast a fire break. And Adja laughed so hard she fell off the bed, while Lou gawked at me, totally stricken on my behalf. I'm not dating Orion at all. We're just friends, Adja wheezed from the floor without even getting up, mimicking what I told her and Lou the night before we'd shaken on our alliance. I hadn't wanted them to come into it on false pretenses. You fail at dating so hard. Thanks, I feel loads better, I said, and I wasn't wrong. I wasn't dating him. Oh yeah, that's fair, Adja said. Only a boy could date someone for 2 weeks and not mention it to them. We all kind of sniggered together for a bit, but after we'd settled back down, Lou said tentatively, Do you want to? Her face was serious. My mother told me it was a really bad idea. My mom told me that all boys are carrying a secret pet mal around in their underwear, and if you get alone with them, they'll let it out, Adja said.
Oh my God.
We both shrieked with laughter, and she laughed too. I know, right? But she did it on purpose. She told me to pretend that it was true the whole time I was here, because it would be true if I let a boy get me pregnant. Yeah, you can't make the run in the graduation hall if you're carrying a baby, or if you're pregnant.
Her mom did.
Yeah, but she was barely a month along, so she wouldn't have been showing or anything at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, it wouldn't have affected her much.
Lou gave a shiver all over and wrapped her arms around her knees. My mother got me an IUD. I tried one. I got massive cramps, Adja said grimly. I swallowed. Oh, it wasn't a month. I hadn't bothered. It seemed the least likely of my many worries. My mom was almost 3 months gone with me at graduation. So it's early. You're still in your first trimester, but can you imagine if you're like having morning sickness? I was so sick with Sari, like the whole time, and all day, every day.
Yeah.
I can't imagine trying to run out. And we don't know if it interferes with casting either. Let's see. Oh my God, Adja said. She must have freaked. My dad died getting her out, I said softly, and Lou reached out and squeezed my hand. My throat was tight. It was the first time I'd ever told anyone. We sat quiet for a bit, then Adja said, I guess that means you'll be the only person to ever graduate twice. And we all laughed again. It didn't feel like tempting fate, just then, to talk about graduating like it's something that was going to happen. I lay back down to rest until dinner time, half drowsing while we talked about plans for the first quarter and how much mana we thought we could build. As Lou scribbled down budget numbers, I couldn't help but think wistfully of the power sharer. I rubbed my fingers around my wrists where it had been. I almost couldn't blame Chloe or anyone from New York. All that mana just flowing at your fingertips, so much you couldn't see the end of it. I hadn't been able to feel the work behind it. It felt free as air. I'd only had it for a few hours and I already missed it. I kept almost falling asleep again and then rousing back up. Wasn't sure why. Adja and Lou would have understood and even watched over me and woken me up for dinner. We should think about anything else we can use and anyone else who might want to recruit, Adja said. I might be able to finish the loot early enough to make some more things first quarter. We should go through each other's spell lists, too. Lou said softly, There's one more thing I have. And then she got up and went out the door, and I realized with strong indignation that the reason I kept starting up was that I was waiting for another knock. I glared at the door, and a few moments later there was another knock, but it was just Lou coming back with a small box in her hands. She sat down on the floor with crossed legs around it and opened the lid and brought out a little white mouse. It wriggled its nose and squirmed over her fingers, but it didn't make a dash for it. You have a familiar, Adja said. Oh my gosh, it's so cute. He's not a familiar, Lou said. Or he wasn't. I'm just starting to. I have 10 of them. She didn't meet our eyes. It was all but an open admission.
Ouch.
She'd been going for the very unofficial Maleficere track. No one brings in 10 mice and feeds them out of their supplies for any other reason. I have an affinity for animals. Which is probably why her parents had made her do it, I realized. They'd known she'd be able to keep her sacrifices alive. And also why she'd hated it so much, even after 3 years, and she decided not to go back to it. So now you're making him a familiar? I asked. I didn't know exactly how that works. Mum's only ever had spontaneous familiars. Once in a while, an animal will arrive in our yurt that needs looking after. She helps it, and then it hangs about and helps her for a while before it drifts away again, back to being an ordinary animal. She doesn't try to keep them. Lou nodded, stroking the animal's head with a fingertip. I could train one for each of you, too. They're nocturnal, so they can keep watch while you sleep, and they're really good at checking food for anything bad. This one brought me a string of enchanted coral beads 2 days ago. His name is Zhao Jing. She let us hold him, and I could feel the mana at work in his tiny body. He already had a kind of blue shimmer over the surface of his eyes, and if you looked at his fur from a sharp angle. And he sniffed at us curiously, unafraid. After we each stroked him for a bit, Lou put him down and let him just roam around the room. He scampered around sniffing at things and poking his head into places. He got up on the desk, then turned wary right near the spot where the scuttler had been hiding. He ran away from it fast, back to Lou, until she checked it for him and showed him that it was clear. Then she patted him and praised him and gave him a little chunk of dried fruit out of a bag she had tied to her waist. He climbed in the front pocket on her shirt and sat there, nibbling on it happily. Could you train the rest for other people? I asked, watching him, utterly entranced. You'd get a lot in trade. I'd never had much time for animals before. Once Mum had trained me out of wanting to dissect them, I merely ignored the dogs on the commune and was ignored in return. I'd never even liked cute cat videos. But I hadn't quite realized how starved I was of seeing anything alive and moving that wasn't trying to kill me. Familiars aren't common here. It's really expensive in terms of weight to bring them in, and painfully hard to take care of them inside. When your chances are to feed yourself or feed your cat, you feed yourself, or else the next mal gets you and the cat too. But mice are cheap enough to feed that it wouldn't be that difficult. I just hadn't thought of it as something I'd want. Yes, after I train one for each of my cousins, Lou said. They'll be here tonight. That took me by odd surprise again, being reminded that something you already know, but that doesn't seem true yet. We were seniors now. It was our last year. Tonight was induction. Can we come pick one out now? Adja said. She was as memorized as I was. Do they need anything? Like a cage? Lou nodded, getting up. You'll need to make something enclosed so they can hide during the day while you're out and they're sleeping. But come and choose one now. You have to play with it for at least an hour a day for a month or so before you take it. I'll show you how to give them mana. You have to put it into the treats you give. I swung my feet off the bed and got my shoes. Then Lou opened the door and we all jumped back because Orion was standing right outside like a creeper. He jumped himself, so it wasn't that he'd actually been planning to ambush me. I could only guess he'd been standing there working himself up to knock. I'll come and take a look now, Lou, Adja said loudly. I can figure out how to put together a good enclosure. She pushed Lou, who was blushing again and trying not to look at Orion, ahead of her and out the door past Orion, and then from behind his back she made a wild pointing motion towards him and exaggeratedly mouthed the words I had no trouble recognizing as secret pet Mal. So I had to fight not to go squawking with hysterical laughter into my pillow. They vanished down the corridor. Orion looked as though he would have liked to run away, which I would have sympathized with, except at least he could, since he wasn't already inside his own room. He'd showered, changed clothes, got his hair cut, and even shaved. I eyed his newly smooth jawline with suspicion. I really had absolutely no intention of going out with anyone at school. Forget pregnancy. The last thing I needed was a distraction. He was already generating more than enough distraction in my life, even when I didn't have to wonder whether kissing was going to happen anytime he was in my vicinity. Look, Lake, I said, just as he blurted, "Elle, listen." And I heaved a sigh of deep relief. Right. You just wanted to tick it off before you died. No. You don't actually want to date me, do you? He looked baffled and desperate and then said, I don't, it's up to you. I stared at him. It is, but that's my part. Your part's not up to me. Or are you actually trying to further develop this bizarre loser form of dating where you never actually get around to asking the other person what they think of the idea? Because I'm not helping you with it. For the love of... He dissolved into a strangled noise of wild irritation and shoved both hands into his hair. If it hadn't just been mostly shingled close, it would have been standing up like an Einstein mop. Then he said flatly, without looking at me in the face, "I'm trying not to get kicked out of your life." And I got it, embarrassingly belated. I had Aji and Lou now, and not just him. It was like all that mana at my hands, something so vital you could get used to it so fast you almost forget what life had been like without it, until it went away again. But he didn't. He didn't have anybody else. He'd never had anybody, the same way I'd never had anybody. But now he had me, and he wanted to lose that about as much as I wanted to trade him and Adja and Lou for an enclave seat in New York. Of course, he was still being inexplicably stupid about it. Like, if I did want to date you, I wouldn't want you to date me just because I commanded you to as the price of admission, I said. Are you trying to be dense? He glared at me, but I glared right back indignantly. And then, in the tones of someone speaking to a dim pony, he said, I'd want to. If you want, I want. And if you don't want, then I don't want. Well, that's the general idea of the thing, I said, getting wary all over again. That sounded alarmingly like he did want. Otherwise, it's just stalking. Are you asking? And I'm not kicking you out of my life, no matter what, I added, though I hadn't the faintest idea what I'd do if you did ask. I kicked you out of the way downstairs because I had the odd notion you'd prefer your life saved, which, I'd like to point out now, for the record, I have done in turn. Well, I'm pretty sure I'm up to 13 at this point, so you've got a way to go, he said, folding his arms over his chest, but that really didn't have the right effect. He looked too thoroughly relieved. We needn't quibble about numbers, I said loftily. Oh, I think we do need, he said. And then, just when I was about to relax, thinking I'd steered us back into safer waters, he dropped his arms again and his face went open and a little pale, leaving scared pink standing out on the edges of his cheekbones. Elle, I'd like to ask, but not in here. If we don't even try. I am not getting engaged to go out with you, I said rudely, shoving in before he could drag us back into the shoals. If you're not asking now, that's sufficient unto the day. If we make it out of here alive, and you slog across the pond to come ask me, I'll decide what I think of it at the time. And until then, you can keep your Disney movie fantasies, and your secret pet Mal, my brain unhelpfully inserted, to yourself.
That's great.
He said, okay, fine, in a tone 1/10 irritation and 9/10 relief, while I looked away, trying to stop my mouth contorting around the laugh I was having to fight desperately to keep in yet again. Thanks ever so, Aja. Her mum was a genius, actually. Can I ask you to meet for dinner in an hour? No, you twit, I said, as if I hadn't just forgotten about it myself. It's induction. We've got half an hour at best. He immediately looked sheepish, although, to be fair to us, we definitely had the weirdest graduation day ever. I grimaced and looked down at myself. I ought to shower and put on my slightly less filthy top. Do you want another one? He said, a little tentatively. I've got spares. Our conversation had made clear that he didn't need the slightest encouragement, but caution warred with my fairly desperate longing for another t-shirt, which even the one glimpse I'd had into his room had been enough for me to say with perfect authority he had far too many of for his own good. "Yeah, all right," I said with an inward sigh. At least the whole school was already completely certain we were dating. Chapter break. I was absolutely right about Orion needing no encouragement. The shirt he brought me had the Manhattan skyline on it in silver glitter, a single spot marked out roughly halfway along the island, with a rising swirl of colored glitter, presumably the Enclave location. Not at all meaningful or claim-staking in any way. I'd have thwapped him across the head with it, except it was clean, and in fact smelled faintly of washing powder. He probably had it wrapped up somewhere in a drawer, waiting for senior year. At least it gave me the excuse to abandon him for the girls' bathroom, instantly, so I could put it on. A clean top, over clean-showered skin. Bliss. He'd waited for me outside, and we collected Adja and Lou from her room. I picked into the big tank she had the mice in. Adja's was already marked with a bright pink dot that she'd put on with a highlighter. "You can pick yours tonight," Lou said. The stairs felt odd when we started up because they weren't moving anymore, like getting off a ship after you've been on the water for a long time. The gears had all settled back into place, and there was only the faint ticking of the minor machinery, more or less keeping time till the end of next year. Everyone was going upstairs in a big tidal flow together, so it didn't even take long to climb to the cafeteria and join the waiting crowd. The food line hadn't opened up yet, and about half the tables were folded against the walls to leave a big open space cleared up in the middle, with wide aisles leading to it from each of the stair landings. Up above was the brand new res hall, same as the old res hall, more or less literally, just waiting for the brand new shivering freshmen to be dropped inside. We'd cut it a little fine. Induction started moments after we'd got there. We could feel the faint air-popping sensation of so many bodies displacing volumes of air, one after another, and it was followed almost immediately by the loud clanging and scraping of doors being slid open up on the freshman dorm level. Unless you're one of the monstrously unlucky few like Louisa, you've been told over and over what you are to do the second you arrive. No matter how vomitous or shell-shocked you are, you get out of your room and run straight for the cafeteria. The freshmen come streaming in through all 4 doors, a few of them holding the paper bags that they were throwing up into, even as they keep staggering along. Induction is about as much fun as a yanker, and it takes longer. In 10 minutes or so, they were all shaking and huddled in the middle of the cafeteria. They looked so tiny. I hadn't been one of the tallest kids when we'd come in, but I couldn't remember ever being that short myself. We'd all gathered around them, keeping an eye on the ceilings and the drains, pouring them glasses of water carefully. Even the worst people will come out to protect the new inductees, selfishly, if for no other reason. As soon as the freshmen calmed down and drank some water, they started calling out our names. They had letters from the other side, especially if they were Enclave kids. I knew there wouldn't be one for me. We weren't close to any other families with wizard kids. The couple of times Mum had tried to arrange for us to play together when I was little didn't go amazingly well, and she wouldn't have been able to pay someone to give up some of their allotment to bring me a letter. The only thing she had to barter that would be worth as much as a gram's allowance to another wizard would have been her healing, and she won't charge for healing. She told me she wasn't sure she'd be able to get me anything, and I told her it was all right. But even knowing I would have been there anyway, and this time I even got to enjoy it vicariously. Adja was given a letter by a black girl with her hair in a million braids, each one with a tiny enchanted protection bead at the end. Really clever idea. Lou brought over her cousins to introduce them to me, 2 carbon copy boys with bowl cuts who bowed really politely like I was a grown-up, and I supposed I was, to them. They were a head and a half shorter than me, with soft, round-cheeked faces. Their parents had probably been all but force-feeding them like geese in perspiration. And then a boy with a voice that hadn't quite finished breaking called uncertainly, "I've got a note from Gwen Higgins?" I didn't hear it the first time, but there was a little lull after as people heard it, and he said it again. Aja came over bringing both her letter and the black girl from Newark, whose name was Pamela, spelled Pamyla. Kind of. Pamela? Who knows? One of the reasons parents will have their kids spend a tiny bit of their precious weight allowance on a letter is that they know they'll get an automatic older friend on the other side in return. Do you think it's that, Gwen Higgins? Does she have a kid in here? Pamela said to Aja, sounding hopeful. Aja made a shrugging expression. Lou was shaking her head. If she does, they're keeping it quiet. Everyone would be on them for healing magic, I guess. And then the boy said, for her daughter, Galadriel? And both of them, along with the handful of other people around who'd been paying enough attention to hear him, gave me a double take. And then Aja shoved me in the shoulder indignantly. Several other people were having a furtive look around the cafeteria like they thought maybe there was another girl named Galadriel in the place. I gritted my teeth and went over. Even the kid looked doubtfully up at me. I'm Galadriel, I said shortly and held out my hand. He put a tiny thing, almost like a shelled hazelnut, into my palm. Probably not even the weight of a single gram. What's your name? I'm Aaron, he said, like he wasn't completely sure. I'm from Manchester? Well, come on, I said, and gave him a jerk of my head, leading him back past a bunch of staring faces. There really wasn't an escape from them, though. Aja and Lou were eyeing me themselves. Aja with a narrowed look that suggested I was in for another good long lecture as soon as they got me alone. I introduced Aaron to the others a bit grudgingly, and he and the other 3 freshmen started talking. Lou's cousins both spoke English without the slightest hitch, and as fluently as either he or Pamela did. Aja had a small sheet of enchanted gold leaf in her letter. She showed it to us gleefully. I'll put this around the Argonet toothpegs on the lute. Lou had an almost flat postage stamp-sized tin crammed full of a fragrant balm that she let each of us use a tiny touch of, dipping the tips of our pinky fingers in and rubbing it on the bottom edge of our lower lip. It's my grandmother's poison catcher, she said. It lasts a month or so if you're careful about brushing your teeth. If you feel your lip tingle when you start to put something in your mouth, don't eat it. And all of that was what induction...
Really? You have to say that?
I guess. That's what induction meant to everyone. A tiny infusion of hope, of love, of care. A reminder that there's always something on the other side of this, a whole wide world on the other side, where your friends share what has come to them and you share back. Only that's never been induction for me. It was the first time I'd ever been on the inside of it, and my eyes were prickling. I had to fight not to put my tongue out and lick the balm over and over. Orion joined us with his own mail already in his hand, a fat envelope and a small bag, and whispered to me in a cheerful sing-song under his breath, "Busted!" slinging his arm round my neck and grinning at me. I made a face at him, but I couldn't help smiling a little myself as I carefully unrolled my very own letter. A single tiny strip of onion skin, so thin it was translucent, which had been rolled up into a bead not much bigger than the ones Pamela had on the ends of her hair. It had faint folding lines scored along its length, one every inch, marks for tearing the sheet into pieces. When I held it to my mouth and breathed in, I got the smell of honey and elderflower, Mum's spell for refreshment of the spirit. Even just that one breath of it was good. I swallowed down a hard lump of happiness that warmed my belly, so I brought the strip down again to squint through it. Mum's writing on it was so small and faint, it took me a second to puzzle out the single line. My darling girl, I love you. Have courage, my mother wrote, and keep far away from Orion Lake.
That's right.
The end.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, she cliffhangs both of these.
Oh, man. Great.
Yep, it was very good. So that's the end of book 1, and we'll start book 2 tomorrow.